What should a person do when every dream has been achieved? What remains when there is nowhere left to go? More than a century ago, Alfred Lord Tennyson explored this question through one of the greatest poems in English literature, Ulysses. Welcome to Literary Reflections. My name is Shaunak, and in this series we will explore Ulysses not simply as a poem, but as a reflection on purpose, ambition, and the search for meaning. Before we can understand the poem, we must first understand the mind that created it. So let us begin with a simple question: who wrote Ulysses? Well, Alfred Lord Tennyson was one of the most celebrated poets in English literature and served as the poet laureate of Britain during the Victorian era. He lived and wrote during the Victorian age, a period marked by rapid social change, scientific progress, and debates about faith and human purpose. One of Tennyson's recurring concerns was the passage of time and how it shapes human experience, aging, and ambition. Personal loss deeply influenced his poetry, especially after the death of his close friend Arthur Hallam, which left a lasting impact on his work. Tennyson often explored questions of faith, reflecting the struggle to maintain belief in a world undergoing dramatic intellectual and scientific change. Alongside faith, he examined doubt, portraying the uncertainty and inner conflicts that many people experience when searching for truth. His poems frequently elaborate perseverance, emphasizing the importance of courage and determination in the face of hardship and severity. Above all, Tennyson was fascinated by humanity's search for meaning and purpose, a theme that is powerfully expressed through the character of Ulysses. Together, these themes make Ulysses more than a tale of a legendary hero. It becomes a timeless reflection on how humans confront aging, uncertainty, and the desire to keep striving toward a meaningful life. What makes Tennyson remarkable is that he was not simply a poet of his age, he was a poet of experience that every age must confront. His work is filled with doubt and reflection, longing and endurance, all rooted in a deep engagement with the human condition. Tennyson explored emotions and struggles that define human life: the search for meaning, the fear of uncertainty, the pain of loss, the passage of time, and the determination to continue despite setbacks. Because of this, his poetry feels both deeply personal and universally relatable. It is this ability to speak to question of purpose, resilience, and the desire to keep moving forward that allows poems like Ulysses to continue resonating with readers across generations. Even today, in a world shaped by rapid change and uncertainty, Tennyson's themes remain relevant. Readers still grapple with questions of identity, ambition, fulfillment, and what it means to live a meaningful life. That is why Tennyson continues to matter. His poetry reminds us that while times change, the fundamental experiences of being human endure, giving his work a timeless and lasting appeal. One reason Tennyson continues to matter today is that he understood something fundamental about human life. How should we live? Life does not only challenge us when we fail, sometimes it challenges us when we succeed. What should we do when our goals have been achieved? When the destination has been reached? When the life we once imagined for ourselves has finally become reality? Questions like these lie at the heart of Ulysses. But to understand why Tennyson asked them, we must first travel back to the moment when the poem was written. And this brings to the next part of our video, where we will explore when was it written. Ulysses was completed on 20th of October 1833, although it was not published until 1842 in Tennyson's two-volume collection, Poems. What is particularly remarkable is that the poem underwent almost no substantial revision during those 9 years. This is unusual, as we know that Tennyson's normal working habits, he was famously meticulous and often revised his poems extensively, returning to them repeatedly in search of the precise wording, rhythm, and effect he desired. Ulysses, however, stands as a notable exception. Unlike many of Tennyson's major works, it remained largely unchanged after publication. The 1842 collection, Poems, include both new and revised works and featured some of Tennyson's most celebrated poems such as Mariana, The Lady of Shalott, The Palace of Art, The Lotus Eaters, and Ulysses. In the second volume of this collection, Ulysses was published. At the time, Tennyson was only 24 years old and was not yet the celebrated poet laureate as we know today. Yet from this early age of his career came a poem that would eventually be regarded as one of the defining works of the Victorian age. But the significance of 1833 lies in more than the date itself. To understand the deeper emotional world from which Ulysses emerged, we must look at what was happening in Tennyson's life during that year. So what was happening which shaped this wonderful poem? It takes back to the next part of our video to explore exactly what was happening during that time. Now, the year 1833 was significant for more tragic reason. In September of that year, Arthur Henry Hallam died suddenly while traveling in Vienna. He was only 22 years old. The cause was believed to be a cerebral hemorrhage, and the news arrived without warning. Swift, devastating, and irreversible. For Alfred Tennyson, Hallam was more than a friend. He was a brilliant thinker, a trusted companion, an intellectual equal, and one of the few people who truly understood and championed his poetic ambitions. Tennyson was only 24 years old, standing at the threshold of his literary career when he suddenly confronted with the reality of death. A future that had seemed full of promise was shattered in an instant. The friend with whom he had shared dreams, conversations, and hopes for the future was gone forever. For years, Tennyson struggled to come out with this loss. Grief followed him like a shadow, shaping his thoughts, his outlook on life, and the poetry he could write. More than a decade later, he would give voice to that sorrow in Memoriam A.H.H., one of the greatest elegies in English literature, a work born from love, loss, doubt, and the search for meaning in the face of death. I remember the famous line from In Memoriam, "By faith and faith alone embrace, believing what we cannot prove." Yet Hallam's death raises an important question. Did this tragedy influence the writing of Ulysses? No, in order to answer that question, we must look more closely at the relationship between Ulysses and the painful circumstances in which it was written. Arthur Hallam was engaged to Tennyson's sister Emilia. This meant that Hallam was not only Tennyson's closest friend and intellectual companion, he was also expected to become a part of the family itself. In February 1832, Hallam visited Emilia and wrote, "I love her madly." Emilia, in return, was deeply fond of him and was charmed by what she described as his bright, angelic spirit and his gentle, chivalrous manner. The engagement reflected the deep bond between the two families. For Emilia, it meant the loss of the man she intended to marry. For Tennyson, it meant the collapse of plans and expectations that had seemed secure only months before. But this raises an important question. What does this devastating loss have to do with Ulysses? After all, the poem is not about Arthur Hallam, nor does it mention his name. Yet many readers and scholars have long believed that Hallam's death provided an important key to understand the poem's emotional power. At first glance, Ulysses appears to be a poem about an ancient Greek hero. But many readers have suggested that beneath the surface lies something more personal. Imagine the situation Tennyson found himself in during 1833. A young poet loses the person closest to him. The future suddenly becomes uncertain. Questions arise that have no easy answers. How does one respond to such a loss? How does one continue when life has been profoundly altered? In this light, the figure of Ulysses begins to take on a deeper significance. He is an aging hero who refuses to stop, a man who continues seeking even when the journey has become difficult and uncertain, a man who chooses action rather than resignation. This does not mean Ulysses is simply Tennyson in disguise, but asks the question, how do I continue? Will you stop here or will you continue the journey? Literary interpretation is rarely that straightforward, yet it is possible to see the poem as expressing an attitude towards life, an attitude that refuses paralysis, refuses despair, and insists on moving forward despite loss. Perhaps that is why the poem culminates in one of the most famous lines in English literature: to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Not as a denial of grief, but as a response to it. Whether or not we read Ulysses as a direct response to Hallam's death, one thing is clear. Why did Tennyson choose to speak through an aging hero rather than in his own voice? The speaker of the poem is an aging hero, but the poet was just 24 years old. Now, first, the distance creates freedom. By speaking through Ulysses, Tennyson could explore feelings of loss, purpose, and uncertainty without writing directly about himself. Second, emotional age is not always the same as physical age. Although Tennyson was only 24, Hallam's death forced him to confront profound questions about meaning, loss, and the future, questions often associated with later life. Third, Ulysses represents humanity. The poem captures a universal moment when we ask whether one chapter of life has ended and what comes next. For these reasons, Ulysses becomes more than a personal reflection. It speaks to experience that people encounter at many different stages of life. And it is with this understanding that we can now turn to the world, to the poem itself, to the hero, and the story from which Ulysses emerges. In 1833, Tennyson suffered the devastating loss of his closest friend Arthur Henry Hallam. Hallam's sudden death confronted the young poet with questions that many people encounter much later in life, questions about mortality, purpose, loss, and the uncertainty of the future. Rather than speaking directly about his grief, Tennyson adopts the voice of an old king who has already achieved greatness, completed his adventures, and returned home. Yet Ulysses is restless. He refuses to believe that life has nothing more to offer. The poem therefore represents a fascinating contrast. A young poet, shaken by grief and standing at the beginning of his life, chooses to speak through the voice of an old hero looking back upon a lifetime of experience. Perhaps this is because Ulysses is not merely an old man. He represents a universal human condition. And his answer, voiced through Ulysses, is one of the most memorable declarations in English poetry: to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Now, after this, we find that what was happening in the world that surrounded Tennyson. Now, in order to gain a fuller understanding of Ulysses, we must move beyond the poet's personal experiences and explore the historical and cultural environment that helped shape the poem, the world of the Victorian age. When Ulysses was written, Britain was entering a period of extraordinary transformation. The world around Tennyson seemed to be expanding in every direction. New factories were reshaping cities, steam engines and railways were changing the pace of everyday life, scientific discoveries were opening new ways of understanding nature. At the same time, Britain was extending its influence across the globe. Ships connected distant continents, new territories were explored, and the horizon seemed filled with possibilities. For many people, it felt as though an age of endless progress had begun. It is a question that echoes throughout Ulysses. Now, the Victorian age was not defined merely by machines, factories, or expanding empires. It was also defined by a particular way of thinking. Many people believed they were living in an age of progress, an age in which knowledge could continually expand, new frontiers could be explored, and human achievement had no fixed limit. The spirit of the age was one of the movement and aspiration. Explorers traveled distant regions of the world, scientists pushed the boundaries of knowledge, engineers transformed landscapes with railways, bridges, and machines. Across society, there was a growing belief that the future could be different from that of the past. Now, in many ways, this spirit resembles the outlook of the Ulysses himself. He refuses to believe that life has reached its conclusion simply because one journey has ended. Instead, he looks towards what remains unexplored and asks what new horizons might still lie ahead. Seen in this light, Ulysses is not only an ancient Greek hero, he also embodies something that many Victorians admired: the desire to keep moving forward, to keep discovering, and to keep seeking beyond the limits of the known world. Ulysses has already achieved what few men could ever dream of achieving. He has won glory on the battlefields of Troy. He has traveled across distant seas, encountered strange lands, and experienced adventures that have become legendary. After years of wandering, he has finally returned home to Ithaca, the kingdom for which he had long struggled. He now sits upon the throne as a king, enjoying the security, authority, and honor that accompany success. And yet, despite all these accomplishments, Ulysses remained restless, as though something essential is still missing from his life. Why? By all convention standards, his story should be complete. The hero has succeeded, the journey is over, the destination has been reached. Why does a man who has achieved everything still feel compelled to continue seeking? It is here that we encounter one of the central ideas of the poem, what we called as the crisis of purpose. A crisis of purpose occurs when a person no longer knows what gives meaning and direction to their life. Or simply, it is the question, what now? Imagine someone who spends years working towards a dream, perhaps becoming a professor, perhaps building a successful company, perhaps winning an Olympic medal. For years, life had a clear direction. Everything points towards the goal, and then one day the goal is achieved. The dream becomes a reality. And suddenly a new question appears. What comes next? That is the crisis of purpose. And it is precisely the problem that confronts Ulysses. He has achieved greatness. He has returned home. He has become king, yet he discovers something unexpected. Achievement does not automatically provide purpose. The problem facing Ulysses is not failure, it is success. So we can now see more clearly the nature of the problem confronting Ulysses. The problem facing him is not failure, it is success. His greatest challenge is not reaching his destination, but deciding what comes next. This is what makes Ulysses such an unusual poem. Most stories focus on the struggle to achieve a goal, but Ulysses begins after the goal has already been achieved. The wars have been fought. The adventures have been completed. The kingdom has been secured. And yet a new question emerges. What happens after we achieve our goals? What happens when the dreams we have pursued for years finally becomes reality? Should we settle into comfort and security, or should we continue searching for new horizons? For Ulysses, the challenge is not how to become successful. The challenge is to find meaning after success. And this is what we mean by crisis of purpose. The crisis of purpose in Ulysses is the struggle to find meaning after one's greatest ambitions have already been fulfilled. Early in the poem, Tennyson declares this line: "How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use." For Ulysses, the prospect of stopping is deeply troubling. He compares a life without purpose to a neglected piece of metal slowly gathering rust. To cease striving is, in a sense, to cease fully living. A little later, he makes his position even clearer. "I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees." Life to the lees. These are not words of a man who feels complete. They are the words of a man determined to experience life to its fullest extent. Together, these lines reveal the central tension of the poem. Ulysses has achieved everything that a hero could hope to achieve, yet he refuses to believe that life's meaning ends with achievement. He continues to seek, he continues to learn, he continues to look beyond horizon, and it is this restless spirit that lies at the heart of Ulysses. So before we conclude today's video, let us briefly reflect on the key ideas that we have explored. We have seen that Ulysses emerged from a remarkable convergence of circumstances. It was written by a young poet grappling with grief after the death of his closest friend, Arthur Hallam. At the same time, it was reshaped by the spirit of Victorian England, an age fascinated by progress, exploration, perseverance, and the continual expansion of human horizons. And at the center of the poem stands an aging hero who appears to have achieved everything that life could offer. He had fought in great wars, he has traveled across distant lands, he has returned home, he has become king. Yet he remained restless, yet he continues to seek, yet he continues to question, yet he continues to look forward horizons beyond those already achieved. And it is this tension between achievement and aspiration that gives Ulysses its enduring power. So as we conclude, let us return to the central question raised by Tennyson. For many people, eventually we discover that achieving a goal does not necessarily answer the question of how one should continue living. The challenge is often not reaching the destination, it is deciding what comes after that. Ulysses has achieved. In this sense, Ulysses is not simply a poem about an ancient hero. It is about a deep human experience. Most stories focus on the struggle to achieve a goal, but Ulysses begins after the goal has already been achieved. Understanding this restless figure is the next step in our understanding of the poem Who is Ulysses? In the next video, we will therefore turn to the story behind Ulysses, the world of Homer, Ithaca, and the remarkable character whom Tennyson drew it at the center of the poem. So thank you for joining me, and I look forward to continue this journey with you. If you have liked the video, please do subscribe to my channel and do get notified by clicking on the bell icon. Please do subscribe to my channel Literary Reflections, and see you soon in the next video. To strive, to seek, to find, but not to yield.